So this was shared over on our Reddit subsection, and Robert Reich, who I agree with most of what Robert Reich has to say. I've disagreed with him a couple times on a couple things, but a lot of the times I think his videos are pretty cool, and they bring up some important points and some important issues, and they break them down in a very accessible way, which is really cool. This video, somebody shared this on our Reddit subsection. I skimmed it briefly, and I think it's a pretty good one. Let's check it out. All right, let's make me small. Let's make the video big. So check this out. Robert Reich, this is the 5-step CEO pay scam. So this is addressing what CEOs are really doing. Essentially, CEO pay is sometimes 475 times that of the average worker. And it's at least 13 times that of the average worker. At times, it gets up to 475 times that of the average worker. In other countries, by the way, that's unheard of. When you look at other countries, it pales in comparison to the difference between CEO and worker pay. And by the way, if you read some of the text that justify that is usually pointed to as the Bible for conservative thinking and, quote, free market economics, something like Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, which I've read that book cover to cover, that book is actually against all that stuff. If you read Wealth of Nations, it calls for living wages. It calls for workers and CEOs to be treated fairly, or workers to be treated fairly by CEOs, rather. It calls for all that. If you really read that book, all that stuff is also in there. They're basically saying, hey, markets are fine. Let people have markets, but workers need to be treated fairly. And wealth, and that's so anyway. But regardless, we have a total predatory capitalistic system, which is what capitalism does. Capitalism is predatory, period. That's what it's set up to do. So it always eventually reaches a point where it's completely out of control. So, yeah, here's what Robert Reich has to say, and this is in the contemporary sense of the CEO pay scam.
Average CEO pay at big corporations topped $14.5 million in 2018.
Poor CEOs. Just 14.5 million, some of them. Man, what are they going to do?
That's after an increase of $5.2 million per CEO over the past decade, while the average worker's pay has increased just $7,858 over the decade.
So 5.2 million over a decade compared to 758 over a decade. And that's only in certain cases. Let's keep in mind, you know, when you factor in inflation, when you factor in many ways, wages have gone down. Wages have gone down for workers. Minimum wage has not kept up with inflation. If minimum wage was anything close to what it should be, it'd be well over $20 an hour by now. So wages have been stagnant for years and years and years as a result of rugged neoliberalism, as a result of the deregulation of all workers' rights, as a result of the crushing of the unions. All right, so how did they do this? Here's the fun part of the video. Or not the fun, but you know what I mean by fun part. So he explains what exactly they did, and that happens right about here. Check this out.
Isn't because CEOs have become so much more valuable.
Okay, so he's saying CEOs haven't become more valuable. It's not like they're like, the CEOs, they're doing so much more. The CEOs, ever since we did that undercover boss thing, all the CEOs, they're working in the warehouse for a week, and then they're working in the mailroom for a week, and then they're doing data entry for a week, and then they're being an administrative assistant for a week. They're doing all the different jobs, including being CEO, because they see the value in multi-training. It's not like that's happening. CEOs are just kind of being CEOs. That's what he's saying. All right.
Than before. It's not due to the so-called free market. It's due to CEOs gaming the stock market and playing politics.
So here's what happens. This is where he breaks it down into 5 steps.
How did CEOs pull this off? They followed these 5 steps. First, companies began paying their executives in shares of stock. Second, they directed their companies to lobby Congress for giant corporate tax cuts and regulatory rollbacks. Third, they used most of the savings from these tax cuts and rollbacks not to raise worker pay or invest in the future, but to buy back the corporation's outstanding shares of stock. Fourth, this automatically drove up the price of the remaining shares of stock. Fifth and finally, since the CEOs are paid mainly in shares of stock, CEO pay soared while typical workers were left in the dust.
That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible. So that's how they did it. That is how they did it. They inflated their own stocks by buying their own stocks with the tax cuts that they were given by Congress. They lobbied Congress, got the tax cuts they wanted, sold the American public and Congress even this bill of goods. Not that it matters because you can just buy Congress. And that's what they did. They lobbied, they bought Congress with money, but they still sold the public this bill of goods. We're going to use these tax cuts to create jobs, to give stuff back to the workers. Then what did they do with those tax cuts? They bought extra shares of stock to inflate their own stocks that they already had investments in. So they basically used, in short, they used tax cuts to pad their own pockets even further. And they didn't invest in their workers and they didn't invest in jobs. That was a big lie. And whenever somebody tells you that tax cuts lead to jobs, that it allows job growth, that the private sector is necessary for job growth, they're straight up lying at this point because it has failed time and time again. It has failed every single time it has been tried because it was never meant to succeed. In a way, it hasn't failed because it wasn't set up to succeed. It was just set up to be a lie and mislead the American people. So in that regard, it succeeded. As a lie to mislead the American people, it has succeeded because that's what it was meant to do. It was meant to be a lie to mislead the American people. And it's been succeeding from the 80s until now. So Robert Reich summed it up in those 5 points. They used the tax cuts to buy more stock when they already have stock in the first place, which inflates its price. So all these breaks that companies are getting, they're not going into the workers. They're going into allowing their CEOs to game the stock market for their own advantage. And what eventually happens to said stock market? It plummets because of them gaming the system. And then what happens when it plummets? Our government bails them out. So basically, there is a system in existence where you can lobby Congress, get what you want, and then with that money that you promise to workers, you put it in your own pocket, you buy up your own stocks, you inflate the price, and then you get richer. And then because of this inflation, because you rigged your own system, eventually the bubble bursts. And then what happened when the bubble bursts? You get more money from the government. So basically, you're cheating a system, making yourself rich in the process. And then when your cheating causes a plummet, you get bailed out. Man, what a system for the rich. If you're the richest of the rich of the rich. It's basically saying, go ahead and cheat, go ahead and lie, go ahead and steal. And when the bubble bursts, we got your back. That's what the United States government does. And that's what the CEOs do. This is our system. Man, ain't that great? Ain't that great? And you're supposed to work for these people and shut up and not complain. You're supposed to not stand up for your rights. If you strike, you're the problem. If you strike, your own company will mock you. When workers were striking for basic rights over at Amazon, they were mocked by Amazon. They were mocked for saying, we want living wages. We want to be treated properly. We want proper warehouse facilities. We want proper air conditioning instead of just having an ambulance sit outside of our warehouse facilities because you'd rather take us to the hospital when we collapse from heat exhaustion than give us proper working environments. We don't want to be treated like robots by having something attached to us that shocks us if we make a wrong move with our hands. And meanwhile, this is happening. And It's going to keep going up. The gap is going to keep getting bigger and bigger until we have a massive strike in this country. All right. So Robert Reich, good summary there. That's what's really going on. That's what CEOs are really doing. So next time somebody uses the Paul Ryan talking point, oh, we just got less taxes, more jobs. It's a lie. It's been a lie for over 30 years because it was meant to be a lie in the first place.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our